Hi everyone, my name is Arun Subramanian and I'm a modern workplace seller with Microsoft. Today we are going to speak about identity and access management. When you think about it, data is the most important asset for any organization. Data is the new currency. Yet most organizations probably are not doing enough to secure their identities. When you think about the multiple threats that are out there, identity is probably the very first of those vectors that organizations need to safeguard. Most of you are probably aware the other threats, which include threats from email malware on the endpoint, or threats to the information, which is broadly information protections, are some of the other planes around which organizations try and secure themselves. But identity still is the most key aspect that they need to secure. Let's understand why. Let's look at some of the trends. When you are looking at data getting or a breach happening, 81% of the breaches that happen are when an identity gets compromised. Think also in terms of all the online accounts that you as an individual may have or organizations have. In 73% of the cases, the password across those accounts are duplicated. That's almost 3 in 4 of every single account that is out there has a password which is a duplicate. And finally, when you look at employees using non-approved app, 80% of the apps that an employee uses are those non-approved apps. And that provides a very large landscape for an employee to be using a set of credentials and passwords on third-party applications which are not approved, and therefore is a very big plane for those identities to get compromised. So what are some of the challenges that an organization is facing today? Well, there is this explosion of apps and devices as organizations tend to have their employees get a lot more mobile and work from anywhere. There is clearly the possibility of an identity getting compromised, and the ability for an organization to have visibility to some of these breaches is starting to get a lot limited. There is also this evolving privacy and regulation standards. As you look across Europe, you have the GDPR, which has come into a regulation, and a lot of organizations are starting to look at their own data privacy and regulation laws that are coming up by their own local or country specific regulators. And then finally, there is this demand for productivity and IT modernizations as organizations tend to chase new markets and new growth areas. So all of this starts to come together and brings to identity being this new control plane. Think about the whole aspect of how data is getting accessed. It could be getting accessed from cloud services. It could be getting accessed from your on-prem servers or applications. The data could also be accessed not just by your employees, but also by other external parties such as vendors or partners. You also have a plethora of device choices out there. It could be a PC, it could be a mobile phone, it could be a browser-based device. All of these are multiple points of access as well as multiple places where data is stored. And therefore identity becomes extremely critical and central to ensuring that you have the ability to provide access and control access. So how do you do that? And that brings us to the solution from Microsoft, which is Microsoft Azure Active Directory. Microsoft Azure Active Directory is the identity and access solution from Microsoft. Azure Active Directory manages more organizations and identities than any other identity provider. 19.3 million organizations, 1.2 billion identities. That's the scale that Microsoft and Azure Active Directory manage today. We don't manage just Microsoft applications. We also manage third-party applications. We are almost shy of 1 million third-party applications that are integrated with Azure Active Directory. In terms of the number of activations that go through Azure Active Directory on a single day, just think of the sheer magnitude. 8 billion authentications every single day. 90% of the Fortune 500 companies today use Azure Active Directory. Clearly, just in terms of the scale and the number of authentications that Azure Active Directory manages, it is unparalleled in the industry. And that kind of also provides us an ability for us to share with you the organizations across various industries that use Azure Active Directory. Here are some of them, and I'll just pick a few just to give you a sense of the organizations that use Azure Active Directory in Asia as an example. Qantas Airlines and SoftBank Technologies are two. Walmart is another organization that uses Azure Active Directory. They have close to about 1 million identities that they use on Azure Active Directory. It just talks about the scale that Azure Active Directory manages. So let's come to what is it that is very central to our investment from Microsoft when it comes to all of this intelligence that comes together, and that is our Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph. This particular aspect, the Microsoft Intelligence Security Graph, is critical to all our security solution, wherein they harness all of this intelligence that comes across the various services across Microsoft and provide the ability of the services to leverage these signals to provide a more secure solution to all our customers. A couple of data points just to give you some additional context. We scan close to about 400 billion emails every single month. We scan 1.2 billion devices, the Windows PCs that are out there, every single month. We do 450 billion authentications every single month. This is across our Azure Active Directory and our consumer services such as Outlook.com, Hotmail.com, Xbox.com. And so just the sheer number of authentications that you see are probably again unparalleled. All of these signals, whatever we see in the service, any threats, any incidents, all of those come together, and that is what goes into every single service of ours to make the security for your organization, your end users, a lot better. So I'm going to share with you two aspects of identity and access management. One is conditional access, and the other is this concept of passwordless. I'll start with Azure Active Directory conditional access. With conditional access, you have the ability to look at the user, the state of the device, the location from where the access is taking place, and also the authentication method or the apps that are in play, and look at the various conditions, see if those conditions are being met, and based on the policies that are set, then choose to provide access to your applications. Now all of this is happening in real time and is automatic. Now I'll take you through a couple of examples, but before that I will set the context of conditional access. So what you see on the left side of this particular slide is an employee that could either be internal or it could be an external party, which could be a partner or a vendor of yours. So depending on the nature of who is trying to log in and from what kind of an identity solution they are trying to log in, you can potentially start to set conditions. The same holds true for devices. The devices could be an Android device, could be a Mac, could be an iOS, could be a Windows PC, and based on the device, again, you can choose to set policies. Here you would also have a preference that the device is compliant, is trusted, and choose to provide access only if it meets those conditions. You also have the visibility to where the device or the person is logging in from. And then you also have the ability to look at the authentication mechanism. Based on these conditions, Azure Active Directory looks at terabytes of data. In this case, close to about 40 terabytes of conditional data, where it is looking to see if all parameters are being met. It also looks at the policies that you as an organization set, and based on this, there is real-time evaluation if those conditions satisfy the organization's requirement, and then allow access to the applications. And that could be a set of controls which could be starting with allow or block access, or to reset the password, or anything in between all of that. So in this example, you would see it could either be limit access, it could require a multi-factor authentication, or obviously it could do a forced password reset. And this is how, once all the conditions are satisfied, the user and the device get access to any of the applications, which could either be your Microsoft applications, your third-party applications, or your applications which are on-prem or on the web. So I'm going to take you through a couple of those examples and how it would reflect from an end user standpoint. So in the first scenario, I have a user who is a sales representative. Now this particular employee is based in London. They have logged in about 5 hours ago, and they have a device which is a mobile, which is completely patched, it is compliant, and is again trying to log in from London. So in this scenario, you see that the risk factor is set as low, and the employee or the sales rep that is trying to access a travel expense application is provided access. Here is another scenario where a user who is a vice president of marketing is trying to gain access to a sales application. You see that the exec user in this scenario, just from a role perspective, is part of a sensitive group. Clearly, it's a senior person. The ability for this person to seek data which is confidential is almost on a daily basis, and therefore just from a sensitivity, from a role perspective or the user perspective, it's a very sensitive role. Now when this person is trying to access information, Azure Active Directory looks at all of those conditions and policies and flags off that this particular person is from a risk profile flagged off as a sensitive person or a role. And here in this scenario, the service, which is Azure Active Directory, asks for an additional factor of authentication, which is the multi-factor authentication, before they are provided access to a very confidential sales data or a sales application. So this is a scenario where even though the user is trying to access application, it is not being limited or controlled, but you are triggering off an option to ensure that the user is who they are by multi-factor authentication, and then they are provided access to the application. Here is a third scenario where the user is a sales representative, is based in London. Now you would see in this particular scenario they are wanting to access a sales application which has all the sales data and is again obviously confidential. But there are a couple of things that are happening here, which is the person is trying to log in from a very unfamiliar location, which is not London. In this case it is Asia, and they are coming through an anonymous IP, so the IP is masked. Clearly both of these factors are off, not consistent with the behavior of this particular sales representative that is based in Asia. And Azure Directory here identifies this as a high risk condition and prevents and blocks access to this particular user. In this scenario, you could choose to force a password reset to ensure that even if the sales representative is traveling out of London and is on a holiday and still needs access, you could still have them get access by making sure that they reset their password before they get access to the data. So here is a scenario where, based on an end user coming to log in into a highly confidential application or a sensitive application, you ensure that in real time you have prevented that access because the conditions that got triggered off were not in compliance to what the organization had put in place. So that was just to give you a preview of conditional access. Conditional access is a great way of trying to prevent breaches. If you recall, I had provided a data point right at the start of this presentation where I said that in 83% of the cases, the breaches are on account of identity getting compromised. Just by triggering multi-factor authentication, you can cut down that aspect of identity getting compromised by 99%. So a great way just to use multi-factor authentication, which is part of the Azure Active Directory services, to ensure that the identity of your employee is not compromised and is always secure. And now we are going to talk about the second of the examples, which is the concept of passwordless. Passwordless is also the concept of the zero trust principle. And so all of that comes together in this particular aspect of passwordless. Passwordless, as the name suggests, is the ability to do away with passwords. I'm sure most of you from the IT side or from an end user perspective do not love passwords. And the reason for that is very plain and simple. Most of the time we now have password policies that have been enforced on employees that makes it a lot complex. You need to have a minimum of 8 characters, it needs to be alphanumeric, one needs to be a capital, you need to use a special character, and by the time you try to not duplicate these passwords, you know that you have a very complex password in your hand, and at the end of the day you can't remember it, and so the only way for you to remember it is to probably write it down somewhere, which beats the whole aspect of why the password was made complex to begin with. And so how do you get away from this whole vicious cycle of having the most complex password? Well, the answer is not having a password. And so there are about 3 such examples or scenarios that are possible where you don't need to use a password. And what you're seeing here are manifestations of that passwordless scenarios. So the first is Windows Hello. Windows Hello is a Microsoft solution which allows you access to your device either through biometric or facial recognition. A lot of devices, both from Microsoft, which is the Surface device, and from our partners, come with this ability for a user to log in into their device without the need for entering their passwords. All I need to do is look at the PC at the time I come in to log in, and automatically it logs me in. So I've just done away with passwords. In fact, at Microsoft, we have moved away from having employees change their password from 3 months to 1 year now. So 1 year is the default policy when an employee gets to change their password, and even if they forget at any point in time in between this whole 1 year period, employees have the option to go and do a self-service reset of their password. So Windows Hello is a great example. The second is the Microsoft Authenticator app. Now, a phone is something that you carry with you anywhere and always, and the Authenticator app is a great way for you to confirm the identity of a person because the app uses, as opposed to a password, a 2-digit code that you need to synchronize between the application that you are logging in with the app, the Authenticator app, which shows it up. But then because you have the phone with you, you are able to enable multi-factor authentication. So it is not just about who you claim to be you are by using the app, but it is also the device that you use which is present with you and is able to provide a multi-factor authentication of you as a person. And then the last one is these hardware tokens, which provides the ability to again log in without the need for a password. And this is an example that I am going to demo to you now. So 3 great ways of ensuring the ability to log in into your applications, into your devices without the need for you to enter a password. So now I'm going to take you through this passwordless demo. And just to set some context, this is where you will have the ability to log in into a service or an application without the need to enter a password, but instead use a USB key like this, which adheres to FIDO 2.0 standard. So I'll just set some context. So Windows Hello, Microsoft Authenticator app are great examples where your employees have the ability to log in without the need for a password. Same with this key, but this key, think of it as a scenario where your first line workers or your employees on the shop floor, it could be in a manufacturing setup, it could be in a retail setup, where they don't need to enter their password into the multiple workstations that they go about accessing, but instead use this USB key to insert it and get access to the data and to the device without the need for them to physically enter a password. So I'm going to show this experience to you on a consumer service, which is Outlook.com, but the same experience is possible when you use Azure Active Directory and a device like this, and then try and access your applications, line of business applications. So for that, I'm going to log in into Outlook.com. So when I log in, it is going to ask me for my credentials. So I'm just going to enter that. And then instead of entering a password, I'm going to choose to use the option to use a USB key like this. So I'm going to say sign in with a Windows Hello device or a security key. So I click on that, and then it's going to prompt me to insert this device. And so you notice that it is not prompting me for a password. So I choose the security key, which is this USB key, and then it'll ask me to insert this particular device. So I'm inserting it into this USB port on my workstation. And once I do that, it's prompting me for a PIN. So this is a great way for enforcing multi-factor authentication. So even if this particular device does get lost, stolen, misplaced, the identity does not get compromised, because the person, whoever finds it, will still need to know the PIN in order to get access. So in this scenario, I'm going to go ahead and enter that PIN, and then I log in. Now, In this scenario, I also have the ability to enforce a biometric option, which is to use my fingerprint to authenticate. So I'm going to enforce that as well. So as I click on OK, you will see that come up, and it's asked me to touch the key. And once I touch the key, you will see that it allows me access into my service. So now I'm logging into Outlook.com without me having the need to have entered a password. So there you have it. I entered my credentials, used the USB stick, and I instantly have got access to my application. So now I'm going to summarize what you as an organization, as the IT team or security team could be doing to enable some of the things that I have shown as part of our presentation. So the first thing is to enable Azure Active Directory Premium. The second is to enable multi-factor authentication. You saw a couple of examples of that today. The third is to enable your self-service password reset with password protection. Now this is something that you did not get to see, but is part of Azure Active Directory Premium. So if you have that, you should definitely go and set that up. That will provide your end users a great experience, both in terms of a passwordless experience, as well as the ability to reset their own password should they at some point in time forget their passwords. And then finally, develop a plan to move your applications to Azure Active Directory. So you already saw that Microsoft today integrates with close to about 800,000 odd third-party applications. So if your line of business application is something that you would like to integrate with Azure Active Directory, you should please have your teams work on that as well. So this is a list of to-dos that you can quickly act on if you have Azure Active Directory Premium already implemented in your organizations. In case you don't have that and you would like to know more about Azure Active Directory and you want to understand how you could implement some of these capabilities, please do feel free to reach out to the Microsoft representative or to your partner representative who can help provide you additional details and help you in this journey towards securing the identities for your organization. With that, I would like to thank you on behalf of Microsoft for having watched this presentation. Thank you.